I am going to make a presentation in the form of a letter. Um, I work, as Sylvia rightly said, at Innova, and we also host the Stuart Hall Library. And within the Stuart Hall Library, we also hold the Innova Archive, which tells the history of Innova's work, but it also holds some archives of artists and curators pertaining to the Black Arts movement as well. We're currently busy trying to make that more accessible so that you can, from Wolverhampton, also access it and you don't have to come down to us in London. But one of the things I noticed is that in a lot of the early organizing, there was a lot of letter writing. Which I mean, we know about emails and texts, and I don't know where those are going to be archived in the future. It's going to be a bit harder to capture these moments. But one of the things I also noticed in the exhibition, which I haven't had a chance to fully absorb yet, was also the relationship to text, which we'll get into at a later point, because I think we're able to communicate with each other with absolute ease these days. Sometimes we are able to also ignore emails. I think there's a couple of people that are expecting some emails from me here. They probably came especially to find out what's going on. But gatherings such as this are also really important for communicating ideas, things that we're working on, but also to be inspired by one another as well. So I'm going to ask if you can move to the next slide. So here is my letter. Dear young Black artist, the letter from me to you. Don't give up. We need you. Well, at least I need you so that I can see myself in you. You see the world through your lived experiences, but you also awaken us to see things which are hiding in plain sight. You might have realized this is not the usual presentation, but I'm writing you this letter because the future needs you. You might not know it yet, but someone is looking at your work and the way in which you see the world, and they are seeing the world through you in new ways too. You are finding ways to tell new stories. We deeply appreciate you, and it's giving them the courage. We are kin. Keep doing what you're doing, and if you're tired of that, then try to do it another way. But please, whatever you decide, don't give up. Stuart Hall always, I think, had the ability to find succinctly how to describe experience through language. It's something I'm constantly struggling with, but his challenge, I think, to us is to articulate a language for lived experience. Experience lived, experience interpreted, experience defined. Your work gives us hope, hope for the hereafter, an oncoming future, continuity. We recognize that time is not really linear, so your story has already begun. It began in the storytelling circles. The writing of our stories loop us into looking at the world otherwise. Your ideas might be contested, but listen to what draws you. Your future is expectant, and there is much work to be done. Your archive is embodied, and there is much for you to read, hear, feel, and see. We need to talk it out. I need to know what you are thinking. Are you writing down how you feel? What angers you, excites you? What makes you feel alive? Your sensing is our compass. Keith asked me, are you sure there was a Black Arts movement? And then he smiled with his eyes. If you know Keith and you know that sideways look, he made me doubt myself for a second. I'd been working at the African and Asian Visual Artist Archive, I think when I was 25 or 26. And that was the first time I realized there was a Black Arts movement. I'd gone through all of my education, primary school, secondary school, university, and I was working at Hayward Gallery. And An artist educator that I knew from a previous job told me that there was this job going at the African and Asian Visual Artist Archive. Well, first of all, I hadn't heard of the African and Asian Visual Artist Archive, so I was excited to know what was in there. And when you could see the wealth of artwork that has been made, the different articles that had been written about the work, the fact that this archive existed, I started to write down the names of the artist, and then I started to try and find them. So like Eddie Chambers one day got a knock at the door in Bristol. Probably thought, what's this girl doing here? But he was welcoming, as if he'd known me for a long time, but he's never known me. So this letter that I'm writing is from the future, but it's to yourselves. It was the letter maybe that didn't reach you, but I hope you understand that. This is in the galleries. It's the first time I'm seeing it in real life. And it's so much better than this image. It's one of my favorite works. It's one of the works I found when I was working at the African and Asian Visual Artist Archive. And I'm just so excited to be able to see it in real life today. Thank you, Keith. I'm honored to be in this room with you today. Do you know that we are making tomorrows and even yesterdays? Your thoughts, your ideas, and the time you spend in the quiet hours thinking about what you want to make and the stories you want to tell. A world is waiting for you. We are listening, and our ancestors are whispering. Through their marks in words and images, we decipher new worlds and new ways of being. Through your politics, you are crafting an aesthetics of resistance to usher in the world to come. We are welding together. We are making shifts and turns. Movements are made through the continual collective work, joining waves of inspiration, collectivizing memory. We are remembering together and honoring the work of those that have gone before and are yet to come. I included this work. Gavin Janchas, as far as I know, wasn't part of the Blk Art Group, but for me, I really was seeing the ways in which these worlds were being crafted, and this idea of like worlding, crafting or making a world that hasn't yet recognized your brilliance, but also the ways in which I guess European modernism takes from what has already previously existed and repackages it. And I think one of the things I continually see in the work of the Blk Arts Group is also the ways in which they are interpreting these images and being critical of them at the same time. Sometimes it's hard, I know, because we are tearing things down, pulling them apart, and sometimes starting anew. Or we are dwelling in the damaged epistemes of structures that have tried to extinguish us, to enslave us, to make us invisible and dehumanize us. But you cannot quiet us. We are here, and we are others' futures too. Our voices will be heard, and our stories must be told. Have you found your voice yet? Where is it located? You are bringing life into being with your voice, so don't let anyone tell you that you are not enough. If they say don't, no, I wouldn't do it like that if I were you. You must not. Then push that door a little. You probably definitely should. Find the line to follow and then don't follow it. Stay within it, dance on it, take it off path, color with it, within it, color without it, color over it, and then draw a new line. Again, it was great to see your work in the gallery today. One of the things I'm being really struck by as I'm looking through the exhibition is also the scale of the work. And one of the things I talk about in the letter is about honoring, but it's also really interesting how we also pay respects to those people who have brought us up. Mothers are important people in our lives, fathers too, but mothers especially. And that's something I kind of see recurring in a number of the themes actually I wanted to also bring into the room today. Don't be afraid to ask the difficult questions. Have you been called a troublemaker? Good. You are the trickster, the mischievous, curious one we've been waiting for. They told us not to dig too deeply into our history. We should, of course, be prepared for the trauma and pain of our stories, but within our existence, we must also find the strength and beauty in our struggle, in our coming together, in recognizing and seeing each other. I see you, and I want to witness what you are crafting, what you are weaving together, what you are birthing. And in the force of creativity, we are inhabiting glimpses of freedoms. Actually, Alinta, she's in the room. Alinta, Sarah, where are you? Yeah. So Alinta has been working across the archives of Donald Wadding. We have some archives at the Stuart Hall Library, but there's also archives at Tate, and the sketchbook specifically is something that Alinta has been looking at. So if you want to know more, you can find Alinta later. But there's also other people in the room. Don't worry, Alinta, I'm not going to put it all on you. I think it's important also to say that while we recognize that our bodies are also containers and vessels and collect experiences, the physical archives like sketchbooks or any ephemeral material that we're seeing in the exhibition of calling people for the conference or the exhibition leaflets, it's so interesting to see how those are leaving trails to let us know that something happened. I was explaining today when I was walking from Wolverhampton train station that question of, but did the movement really happen? It really made me think about how you kind of left in some ways trails of something that had taken place before you. And you're trying to pick up those pieces. And sometimes it's like accidental. Someone will give you a book or will tell you about something that an artist that you didn't know about before. And somehow you're sort of piecing all of these things together and hoping that there's a way of finding continuity. For me, I think that's definitely been through education. And I definitely don't want it to be the case that people go through their education in this country not knowing a single Black artist, because there's so much wealth of creativity that's gone before us and is to come. Here Comes Trouble. I played that at the entrance as one of my songs to get me in the mood. Yeah. We're going to play it again, yeah. Yeah? We're going to have a little interlude. You did an excellent job. Don't wait for the revolution. The movement to take you to the shoreline. Be bold. Why not? After all, you are young. Make mistakes. Fail. Fail again. Fail better. Have fun. Our freedoms have been fought for. Let's not forget them. Your courage in showing up for others is the strength we need to sustain us. I am challenged by the way you don't accept the status quo, and your insistence is shaping what is to come. Stay open. Today could be the day that changes your life forever, or even tomorrow. That one conversation, that new friend you make today, an artist you didn't know about, a book you haven't read, a work or film you have not yet seen. These cultures we share are the ways in which we remind each other of who we are, and in so doing, begin to understand ourselves. An invitation: expect the unexpected to happen. It's in our coming together that things happen, ideas fly, and we collectivize our actions. We are the sum of the dreams of our ancestors. I borrow in part these words from Maya Angelou. You are the sum total of everything you've ever seen, heard, eaten, smelled, been told, forgot. It's all there, and every now and again, play your music loud. We are the migratory sound of the drum, and you never know who might be summoned by your invitation. So play it loud, Dance and listen. Listen because the whispers are carried in those waves from the depths of the belly of the ocean to the archipelagos, across the waves in the dance halls, in the movements of your belief and your right of expression, with all the love in the sea, the sky, and the land. Sepake. I've just got two other things I wanted to read, and then it would be great to invite the artists up. Sometimes coincidences happen, or sometimes things align. But I often find that when I'm in the Stuart Hall Library, that I start off with a search of something I'm supposed to be looking for, and then I end up somewhere else. Something else draws me. And I didn't know that Eugene Palmer was going to be here today, but Eugene, I have a conversation that you had with Patrina Straw, I don't know how many years ago. Are you ready to hear yourself? It's always my fear as well that someone will do this in the future, but hopefully you still feel excited about what you said. Are you ready to hear your younger self? No, it's wonderful actually. There's a couple of things I wanted to. I mean, it's right towards the end of this. 1 minute, I'm coming. All my photocopies. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okay, I'm going to read two things because actually I started off actually wanting to to think about what is it that we think of when someone says to you black art? Like what does that expression actually mean to you? And I did go down a little rabbit hole, but I also found some things I didn't know about. So I was also excited for that journey. But in the end, I decided that I wanted to, I don't know, speculate on a letter that I would have sent the Blk Art Group if I could send it to them from the future, because maybe you didn't necessarily know that we would be sat in this room today because you decided that there was something pertinent and important for you to work on together collectively. But through your actions and through, making that call out also to other students to come together, it meant that it left a legacy and a record, not only in the exhibitions and everything that you did, but it made a mark. And I think I often think about how, I think about time in relation to continuity. And sometimes there's skips and jumps and things weave and fold. But I recognize that there are individuals and then there's like collective moments, but all of those moments are important altogether. Remembering to remember all the dead at the bottom of the ocean. They are all my ancestors, and acknowledging that all that is part of me. They are not actually all my memories, rather they are part of a collective memory. I need to and want to participate in the collective memory of slavery to fill out the experience of what it is to be Black. Blackness can be perceived and defined in very narrow and impoverished terms, but it isn't like that. The idea of remembering to remember, I see, for example, in the picture of my mother, which I call Fighting Fit, since it is not just speaking about her particular life history, but is referring to a much longer history about our being fighting fit. That wasn't too embarrassing, was it? You were nervous there for a second, I could tell. No, it was. I thought it was wonderful, and really helped me. And then the last person. No, there's two other people I want to bring into the room. One is Eddie Chambers. I mean, I was going to write to him yesterday saying, Eddie, what do you think of this? But I thought, no, maybe he doesn't want to know what my thoughts are. But when I first started at Innova, someone gave me this small uh, booklet that was made after a book called Recordings, which was documents of Afro-Caribbean and Asian exhibitions that had taken place prior to Innova being set up. Um, and I still, I read these words as a challenge, and I'm going to share them with you today. Black artists in British art, some problems with history and its treatment of Black British artists. In seeking to contribute to the researching and establishing of more substantial and credible histories of Black artists in the UK, the would-be researcher is faced with a number of difficulties and issues. These difficulties and issues begin with the question of terminology. Strictly speaking, Black artists, as a self-declared and self-identified body of practitioners, did not emerge in the UK until the early 1980s. Before this time, there were no Black artists as such. There were instead Afro-Caribbean artists, West Indian artists, African artists, Asian artists, and so on. And with an artist signified as African or Asian, there were oftentimes more specific labels of nationality such as Nigerian, Ghanaian, Ceylonese, Indian, and so on. This particular history of Black artists in Britain begins with those young artists from African, Asian, and Caribbean countries of the then British Empire who made their way to Britain in the decades of the mid-20th century to begin or continue careers as visual artists. Without exception, none of these artists referred to themselves as or their practice as Black. Many of these artists presupposed or imagined that they were part of the cosmopolitan, metropolitan art world in which seemingly blunt label of ethnic or racial difference had no substantial place. A history of Black artists in Britain, stretching back to the mid-20th century, tends to presuppose that Black artists existed as such over the duration of many decades, with Black artists only emerging and being so named in the early 1980s. There is perhaps a need for circumspection in the use and application of labels as well as the adjectives such as Black. Eddie Chambers always likes to give us a challenge, huh? Well, with that, would the artist like to come and join me? No, Keith, you don't want to join. Okay. Wherever you like. Okay, so I'm here. I just wanted to check. Am I doing introductions? Am I? I must. I am. So, okay. How do we do these introductions? I think I'm going to start. If it's okay, I'm going to introduce you, Keith, and then Keith, you can choose to introduce somebody else. Maybe you know the other people on the panel. Yes. Okay. I mean, I wanted to just also, I guess, think about, Keith, the way in which the Blk Art Group and the formation of the Blk Art Group, your study, your introduction to the art world, if that is even a term that you would have used then. How would you describe, Keith, the definition for you of being a Black artist? What does that mean for you, by way of introduction?
Oh, by way of introduction, this is so difficult.
Keith Piper.
I'm sorry, yeah. And it's so difficult because I was thinking, just in terms of kind of what you said and what Eddie said about the emergence of the term Black art, and locating that in the early 80s. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, because it's something which was asserted by Rashida Reed. And as we have a room full of kind of great researchers here, it might be great for somebody to actually look into this. According to Rashida Reed, the first time that the term Black art was used in this country in connection with an event was in June 1981 in this building, in the room downstairs with the exhibition called Black Art Undone. Now, we had no idea about that because at that time we were actually reading a lot of American stuff. So, and the term black art was actually used quite readily there in terms of kind of there's this whole movement about black, you know. However, it could be that the first time that the term was used here was actually in this building 42 years ago, which is interesting. Just as a side, now your question was about myself and the term black art. I mean, the reason why I rolled my eyes and still do about the use of the term black art movement is because I am recollection of the 1980s, and it is fuzzy, of course, because I'm old, was just of lots of arguments and the absolute absence of a sort of consensus as to what any of those terms meant. So much so that because within the kind of group in which we called the Blk Art Group, which was a really small group actually, we actually wanted to pose a set of ideas around the role of art practice as a political and educational tool. That for the second convention, we kind of wanted to define a term called radical black art, which was a way of us attempting to kind of get around, you know, the whole tense argument as to what black art was. We just wanted to say, you know, we want to talk about radical black art because that is something which actually says this is about politics, this is about an engagement with the political. And anyway, so I don't know if that answers your question at all.
That's good, but you got a second responsibility.
Oh, my second responsibility. Oh yes, it's to introduce. Now I'm gonna do this because this is a really, I mean, for me, this is a really interesting moment because what makes events like this so important? And I want to talk about the event which happened in 1981. Just quickly, my message in kind of my message to young artists, which I really love that one. I really loved your presentation, this whole idea of what would your message to a young artist be? And I just wanted to go back to October 1982, which was the Black Art Convention, which also happened in this city, just up the road, like 40 years ago. Now, in a sense, you know, there were some interesting presentations. You could listen to the presentations on the website. There was lots of, you know, the Rashid Areen presentation is definitely worth a listen, etc., etc. However, the most important thing that happened on that day wasn't the presentations. I mean, and there have been fascinating conferences since then with great presentations. What the real lasting historical importance of that moment was that there were young artists in the room and there were older artists in the room, and they met for the first time and they networked and they, you know, and they exchanged addresses. And from that exchange of addresses, that, I mean, such Anya Boyce has that wonderful story about her and Nubena Himid, and Nubena prompting her to send her slides, etc. So the most important thing of that day was the networking, was the meetings. And we're all here, and this is a fantastic, and I can't even, you know, I am looking out here and seeing so many fascinating key faces from history and whatever, and so many young people, etc., etc. the most important thing about this event is its potential for networking. We've got a whole day of hanging out. So I'm really hoping that out of this day will come lots of people, meeting other people and exchanging stuff and going on and doing stuff in the future. And maybe in 40 years' time, people will say, oh, well, you know, we first met at this strange event in whatever, but, you know, we continued from there. That's what I think is really important. And so my introduction is going to be because we're so caught up in this kind of thing of history and the significance of history, and people that you haven't seen for 40 years. And in that context, I want to introduce my colleague Janet Vernon, who is absolutely. And one of the things which was actually, you know, now that we're kind of thinking about the events of October 82 and the importance of that event, is that, you know, it's often not recounted and emphasized that the chair of the first National Black Art Convention was who? Janet Vernon.
No, it wasn't. It was Eric Hamilton.
Oh, wait. It's co-chair. That's the correction I'll take. The co-chair of the first National Black Art Convention, and you're there on the tape introducing, is Janet. So Janet is a key figure in the whole development of that moment and the process in that moment. And we lost touch.
I know, it's strange, isn't it?
It is very strange.
But you know what? It's life. It's life. Alive.
Okay, it's life. It's life. Anyway, so that is my introduction to my I am long lost colleague from 40 years ago.
So you know what questions come in, don't you?
Janet Vernon, where have you been?
Janet Vernon, where have you been?
Basically, I've just been working I went into a lot of community arts, and I think after the group kind of expanded, that's where my main focal was. So I worked in a variety of day settings, youth settings around the arts, and education as well. So that's in adult ed. So that's been quite broad, really, and also working with collaborating with other local artists because of my community art base, where we did like local kind of exhibitions and just delivering workshops. It's been purely like hands-on for me, because fundamentally I'm just a maker, and I just like what I love doing, and I also know the value of people interacting with art and the effect it has on their lives as well. And that's been my main kind of focal point, as well as doing my own stuff as well. That's what I went into. I just like doing the hands-on fit, and not necessarily talking about it and intellectualizing about it. I'm like a more hands-on person, and that's been my main. That's where Janet Vernon's been for the past 40 odd years. That's what she's been doing, and raising a family as well. That's a family is essential. Yeah.
So have you two seen each other in the last 40? Have you seen? No.
We've kind of communicated, emailed and WhatsApped. Yeah. Because Marlene knows my brother. Audience over there. So there's all kind of connections anyway, and in fact it was Marlene that approached me to do with this actual exhibition, and thinking, Janet, this is what's happening. Would you like to be involved? And blah blah blah. This is what we're doing, and then thinking, you know what? It is probably time to go and do that. Yeah, I think everybody has their time where you're focusing more on you and what you want to do. It is 40 odd years, like you said. Yeah, it's about time too. Yeah, so do you want me to introduce Marlene?
I would love that.
And this is a lovely Marlene Smith.
Wow. I don't know what to say in accepting Janet's very, very generous introduction, but it was a pleasure to find her. I think I found her via Facebook and to catch up with her after all these years. And I got really excited back in 2012, I think it was, because we being the Blk Art Group Research Project had decided that we were going to do the 20th anniversary of the 1982 conference. 30. Was it 30? Sorry, 30th anniversary. I'm losing decades. And that was when I first contacted Janet and Wenda. So there's another person missing called Wenda Leslie, who was also part of the Blk Art Group. And the Blk Art Group was a movable feast of people. So it started with the four men that exhibited downstairs in 1981. And then gradually the men fell away and more women were involved in the group. So myself, Janet, Vernon and Wenda Leslie were part of the group. And then in the last iteration, it was, and then Claudette Johnson also, she was learning, she was doing a BA at Wolverhampton. So the lineup of the group changed over the years and was quite movable. But I'm really pleased to be here today to see the work on Ian said that he was moved, and I am. I'm really touched by the work on the walls and the response to it.
So let's talk about the work. Let's get into it. So one of the things that really struck me when I entered the exhibition actually was there was two main things. One was the figuration, like the figure is quite prominent. The body is quite prominent in the exhibition. And I think the other thing that also struck me was the intimate scale of the work. So the work for me, I'm now talking specifically about your work that's in the corner of the room, where there's, I'm sorry, I don't know the galleries here very well.
It's called Good Housekeeping.
Good Housekeeping, where you have the figure, and you're not sure actually if the figure is pushing against that wall or if that wall is actually propping her up. And I wanted to talk about this work because while I'm not going to talk about the overall context, the geopolitical context today, because I think a lot of that has been talked about, I wanted to ask you about your response to working in sculpturally, and also to work with text. Yeah, I just wondered if you could say a little bit about that, Good Housekeeping.
So Good Housekeeping is a remake of a piece that I made in 1985. And I made it originally for The Thin Black Line, which was an exhibition organized by Lubena Himid at the ICA, Institute of Contemporary Art in London. And so the figure, in my interpretation, and I think it's open, I would like it to be open for people to see what they see. In my interpretation, she's holding onto that wall because it's a barrier between her and her family. So she's standing guard. And what it means to be working in 3 dimensions, I really feel that 3 dimensions is where I come alive. So there's something about working in something that you can walk all the way around, that you can see from various different vantage points, that really resonates with me, so that I feel that even when I'm working in 2 dimensions, I'm thinking about the 3-dimensionality of an image. And in terms of it being an intimate body, when I made that work, and it's the work refers to the shooting of Cherry Gross. Now, for those of you that don't know, back in 1985, Cherry Gross opened her front door to the police one morning and they shot her. Now, the reason that they were knocking on Cherry Groce's door was because they were looking for her son. I don't remember the details of what they were searching, that he allegedly had done, but they were looking for her son. She opened the door to them and they shot her. And as a result of the injuries that she received, she was confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life. And in 1985, I was so angered by this act of violence and this betrayal, because this woman opened her door. She could have kept her door closed, but she opened her door to what? To the police who should have been looking after her, and they shot her. So it was the anger of the moment that made me want to make that. It felt a very urgent thing to make. But in terms of working with the materials, the piece is made of chipboard, and then on top of the chipboard, I've laid some chicken wire. So the chicken wire is sculpted to make the body, and then on top of the chicken wire are some J-cloths that have been soaked in plaster. And so it was very domestic materials that I was using, things that you would find in a normal household. And I was wanting to say something about the fragility and the vulnerability of this woman who had opened her door. And I wanted to say something about her courageousness and her bravery, because she's got her arm across the picture of her family. And I also wanted to say it by using my own family and my own body. So even though the piece refers to my mother, so the words across the top of the piece say, "My mother opens the door at 7 a.m. She is not bulletproof." And so I wanted to make a reference to my own mother, and to say to people who came to see that show that I recognize how that woman opening that door could have been my mother, how I embody what has happened to Cherry Groce. And so that's really why I wanted to work in 3 dimensions as well, was to give her a roundness and a fullness and a solidity that maybe I wouldn't have been able to achieve in 2 dimensions.
Specifically with this work, because you've obviously shown it in other occasions.
So
I've seen an image of
the image of when the work was made in 1985, it was photographed quite a lot. And you may have seen a photograph, there's a famous photograph of it in Art Rage.
Yeah.
And in other journals around at the time. So it was photographed, but this piece of work was shown once at the Thin Black Line at the ICA, and then it was destroyed. So it hasn't been seen again. And it was a curator at the Tate that suggested to me last year, she suggested that I might want to try and remake it, because it had never occurred to me to remake it. So it's been shown once at the ICA, and this is the second time. This is the first time that it's being shown here as well. So it's a piece that hasn't been seen in real life.
Wow.
Gallery. I think one of the things that I'm also recognizing in seeing the exhibition is how much I've seen a lot of work through reproductions, and almost to a point where you think you've actually seen the work, but you haven't seen the work. So so I was drawn to it today, and I was sort of thinking also about the exhibitions that have taken place, like the Thin Black Line, which is often sort of talked about. And I understood that the Thin Black Line was called that because it was the exhibition was given a corridor. Is that correct?
Yeah. So at the ICA at the time, the way that it was configured was that there was a long corridor space just after you came through the entrance. But it was past the pay zone, so you had to, because the ICA is the space that you have to pay to enter. And so there was this long corridor that was really high, about 20 foot or 20 meters high, but quite narrow, probably about 10 meters wide. And so when Lubaina Himid was invited to put on an exhibition at the ICA, she came up with this idea that she would put 11 women in that corridor, and she called it the Thin Black Line because it was a thin black line snaking through the ICA, and also a thin black line more widely, metaphorically, snaking through the art world. And so that's where the title came from.
Thank you. Keith, I wanted to ask you about one of the works that's in the exhibition that I have seen recently in the Freeze magazine that you talked about, and you talked about this work being in something that had been hidden, that you hadn't seen for a number of years. And you also talked about how a number of works, because you've moved from one place to another, have disappeared or they no longer exist. So I wanted to ask you about your feeling in seeing your work in the exhibition today, in terms of what is that relation to making, in terms of it being something that you have to process, in terms of something that you have to maybe question at the time, in terms of current events, and what does it mean to see it at a later point? So it's a question really of actually your work as almost like touching on a moment archivally, let's say.
I think that's a really interesting point, because yes, there has been a lot of work which has been lost, and especially in terms of the work from the 1980s, the kind of student work, and the work which was physically quite large. I mean, in terms of kind of your work, the piece which we've just been speaking about, in fact that piece was physically quite large, and also physically quite fragile, and quite heavy, and the kind of and the impossibilities to kind of store that work, were almost impossible. And so a lot of that work was lost, because obviously, as young people and as students, you're moving around, you're precarious, etc., etc. Work is lost. And so, apart from kind of work which may have found its way into collections here and there, and those are really quite rare, a lot of that work has been lost. Now, the piece which I spoke about in that thing, which is in the show, it's like right at the back by the Donald Rodney, incredible Donald Rodney, Michael Jackson piece, the interactive one, is a piece which was actually featured in a lot of the Blk Art Group shows, right at the entrance, and as arm in arm they enter the gallery. Now, I thought that work, along with a lot of that work from that time, had been lost until, excavating an attic, I actually found, and the reason why those works survived is because they weren't huge, sort of a particular size. Now, the question about how does it feel to actually see work which you haven't seen for 40 years. And there is that kind of interest in the archival. There's an interest in what kind of technical solutions did you have at your disposal, like 40 years ago. And because those were the means that, as you had, you articulated the content of the work through those means. So a lot of the stuff which you talk about in terms of text, there are these works from the early 80s where there's a lot of dense text in the work. And it's about that kind of, that as a way of attempting to explore quite complex content, in a single two-dimensional object. One of the interesting things which I see when I look at the show is how over time, the kind of means that we had to organize content in any individual work expanded. Because there's a piece from the mid-80s, which was actually a tape slide work. And so tape slide as a way of using time to then unfold the content. And that work was I'm actually going to use the word influenced, heavily influenced by the tape slide work of Black Audio Film Collective at that time, because I was really impressed by the way, before they could make film, because they hadn't actually made any films at that time, they were using tape slide and text as a way of kind of unfolding more complex content. And then it became easier to work with video and other means. So looking at these kind of shows historically, you begin to kind of see how over those decades, we've been able to access, more and more more and more complex ways of attempting to contain quite complex content.
Thank you. Janet, I wanted to come to you because I'm really curious about the work that is in the exhibition, the textile pieces and the jewellery pieces that are in the show. I was curious about two things, actually. One is that you mentioned about your community work, your art education work, and I was curious about whether that has any influence on what you make and what you do as a maker. And the second part was also what drew you to craft, because these, when I think about sort of earrings or jewellery or weaving or textile, I think much more about applied arts, and I was just curious why that was what drew you to that those mediums.
So the first part of the question was to do with
your community work and how that has influenced what you make.
I think it has informed a bit of my practice anyway, because I did do quite a lot of resist dyeing, quite a lot actually. Yes, using batik, and I would work with groups doing that. In fact, I remember sometimes it's collaborating with other artists where I'll be doing things. I remember doing quite a lot of reminiscing kind of projects with like luncheon clubs. So, and sometimes you're teaching people different kind of techniques. So yes, it has played a big part in the way that I've delivered things, because working with older people and collaborating with other artists. So I would say yes, and I think I got more interested in doing textiles. When I was on my degree course, it was like fine art. It was just like doing lots of painting and acrylics. And I think the reason why I chose fine art, I remember talking to Claudette actually, because I was on my foundation course and Claudette was on I think her final degree course. And the actual art block, I think our foundation was probably on the ground floor. So I used to go and explore on the different floors. And that's how I stumbled on Claudette actually. I remember talking because I was doing my foundation, and we were talking and thinking like, fine art gives you quite a lot of flexibility if you want to try other things. I don't like being tied down, and I thought, because I like print as well, and I think on my FE course, I did like sculpting. I remember doing lots of stone carving. So I was thinking I didn't want to be tied down, so I did fine art, and I did started doing lots of experimenting with resist work, and obviously looking at like tie and dye and batik. So all those things I have taken back into the community work and working with different groups. And what you're saying about the actual jewellery, I think it's probably about, I just like things that I like making. I like things that are tactile, a bit like you, Marlene, with the piece that you've done. There's something about doing something three-dimensional that you can see it. And I like, it's like it is body adornment. Because I don't see the difference really, because to me, you're just wearing your art form, and the bolder the better really. And I like experimenting with the metals and just seeing what happened with the patina. But with the jewellery, it's kind of cold-connected, so it's riveting. I like the industrial look. It's articulated as well. So I think it's been about 10 years I was doing the jewellery. So I think I just went on, did a course. That's another thing as well. It's a love of learning, and I put that down to my mom. She was always doing adult education classes, and I think I just tried doing a bit of jewellery, and I thought it's just another medium that you can experiment with, and plus you can mix the mediums as well. So that's how I just got involved in that. I like it. It's tactile. You can wear it. You can mix other mediums with it. That's something that I'm probably going to do, mix textiles with it. And that's why I got involved in doing it. And I've been doing it for quite a few years now. But I don't say no to anything really. I'll try anything. I think that's how you keep your creativity going, by just experimenting. Yeah.
I think I was just thinking in terms of that experimentation and the making and the process of experimentation and making. But you also sort of mentioned at the beginning when we spoke about I just like to make. I do. When you said that, I felt that it was almost also saying something about the intellectualization of it. You're not interested in necessarily.
No, it's I suppose with art galleries, I'm always thinking about the general public. How do you get people engaged, coming to the galleries? I know when I was raising my child, I used to drag him to all the galleries and all the workshops. So I think when I'm saying that, it's more to do with just I like making, and it is linking back to my practice, because I've been involved in so much community work, and when I'm engaging with other people, I want them to get engaged in the activity, and I like them to come. An exhibition's on, a workshop's on. Just come to the gallery, come and have a look, come and have a play. I think that's where I'm coming from, really, and it's just getting more people involved and engaged and enjoying the art form and seeing the value that it has on people's lives, and how it's quite therapeutic to be doing that. So I think when I'm saying that, that's what I mean, really. That I want more engagement, and sometimes there isn't really. Yeah.
So connecting on the level of making.
Yeah.
Marlene, I wanted to ask you about, you worked at the Blk Art Gallery, and in a quite formative time of your life, you took some time out from art school to do that. And I wanted to ask you what effect did organising exhibitions have on your practice and the way that you form community?
Wow, that's a difficult question to answer. So I took a year out of art college in 1985 to 6, and I was invited by Shaka Dedi, who was the director of the Blk Art Gallery, to come and work with him as his assistant. And one of the things that I remember really strongly about that time was that Shaka was a bit of a teacher to me. He knew the history of Black artists in Britain. So he's somebody that knew about artists that were working, that not necessarily artists that called themselves Black, the ones that Keith was referring to earlier, that had been making work in the 1950s and 60s. And so one of the strands of his program was bringing artists like Uzo Egonu, who was a Nigerian painter and printmaker, to the gallery. So that's one of the influences that had on me, was just to think about that history in a little slightly differently. Because when I was doing my A-levels, I'd been trying to find Black artists around the country, and I'd had some success. But understanding the history of them is something that I understood better through my work at the Blk Art Gallery. And then in 1986, I was asked by Shaka to organise an exhibition of Black women's work. That was the first exhibition of the gallery, which was dedicated to women. So I did a show called Some of Us Are Brave, All of Us Are Strong. And that there were 8 or 9, I can't remember, women in that show. And that was the first time that I organised an exhibition by myself. And it was really a learning curve for me, a steep learning curve. Of bringing, because what I did was I brought the women together. I tried to copy Lubaina Hamid's modus operandi, because I'd been in the Thin Black Line, and what she had done is that she'd invited all of the women that were going to show together to meet at her house. And she gave us tea and cake, and then explained her concept and got everybody to kind of buy into what she wanted the show to be. And so I followed that methodology, and I did the same thing. I invited all the women that were interested in showing to a meeting at the Blk Art Gallery, and we talked and we drank and we ate and we argued and we agreed amongst ourselves what the show would be called. So I would say that the Blk Art Gallery was a seminal part of my growing up. One of the things that did happen also at the Blk Art Gallery was that there was a lot of, Shaka wasn't really sure that he wanted to have a women's show. So there was a lot of arguing that happened in the kitchen. There was a big kitchen at the Blk Art Gallery and a big kitchen table. And one of the things that I reminisce about when working there was that we used to have lunches together as a staff team, and different people would volunteer to cook on different days, and we would argue and have discussions about the program, what was coming up, what wasn't coming up, the show that was on at the moment, what was going to happen. And I felt under a lot of pressure when I was doing Some of Us Are Brave, because Shaka was at the time of the opinion that organising a women's only show was somehow dividing the struggle. Mm-hmm. Now, this may sound ridiculous when you're talking in 2023 about women working together, but back in 1985 or 86, it was really wasn't uncommon for men to feel that, you know, by going off together and doing things together, that we were somehow dividing the struggle. It's a terminology that I've heard a lot of times.
Keith, what do you think about that idea?
No, because just as you were saying that, I was just thinking about how important the history of the Blk Art Gallery is, and how, you know, that is actually the kind of the great yet to be engaged with work that we have to do in looking at the kind of archival memory of places, because that was such a key. And even when you said about that particular position of Shaka and others, I think it was, you know, a bit more one of the interesting things when you listen to the audio recording of the first National Blk Art Convention was after Claudette gave her presentation, fantastic presentation, and then there was the kind of conversation about the breakout groups. Now, whether the conference would split into breakout groups, you know, in which different presentations could be further discussed, or whether we stayed as a unit and continued the conversation. In terms of Shaka's, you know, intervention there was actually quite interesting and quite key, in that, you know, this was going to break up the kind of flow of the day. However, it's kind of really interesting to then see how those particular ideas may have been reflected in the early programming of the Blk Art Gallery. Yeah. And I think amongst the fantastic people that we have in the room, along with Marlene, we also have Gretchen College, who was also a worker at the Blk Art Gallery, and another of those people who holds that kind of key memory. But also, have you spoken about that moment when you actually took over as the director of the Blk Art Gallery?
No, I haven't spoken about that.
A really interesting shift in it, because, sure. I mean, just to give a context, Obala was what we would describe as a cultural nationalist group, you know, in that kind of strict sense. And that created some issues with a lot of the political aspirations of some of the younger artists. And so there was a sort of push.
Yeah.
And Marlene took over.
So I took over as director of the Blk Art Gallery in Obala in, I think it was 1991. So I'd been in London for a year, worked as an assistant to Shaka for a year. Then I went back to finish my degree. So I went for another year back in Bradford, which is where I was studying. And then I moved to Birmingham and I ran a West Midlands Minority Arts Service. So I did that for 4 years. And then I got a call from the Blk Art Gallery to say that they needed a director, and would I come and do it for, I think it was 3 months originally, or maybe 6 months. So I packed up my kitchenware and went all the way back to London to run the gallery. And what I felt at the time was that my politics are slightly different to Shaka, so I wouldn't describe myself as an African nationalist, as Keith has just described Shaka and Obala. And I wanted to show, African and Asian artists. So that's something that I did that the gallery hadn't done before. I wanted to do more solo exhibitions because the gallery had focused on group exhibitions, and I just thought in terms of its relationship to other centres of other places that were showing work, it made more sense for the Blk Art Gallery to be a first-time solo exhibition space. But I also wanted to show artists who had been overlooked. So one of the things, so amongst the artists that I showed at the Blk Art Gallery, I did a show with Claudette Johnson called, what was it called? In This Skin. I did a show with Lubaina Hamid called African Gardens, and so those were both solo exhibitions. I did a show of student work. We had a show of Vanley Burke's work. Where is Vanley? He's here somewhere. Yeah. Also, so what I wanted to do was to open up the gallery to the kinds of communities of artists that I felt that it had been close to. So I felt that it wasn't addressing, it wasn't in dialogue with what was happening around Black feminist work. I felt that it wasn't in dialogue around what was happening around gender and sexuality. So those are the types of interventions that I made when I became director there.
Ian's whispering something. Okay, all right. Okay, sorry. I was hoping to open it up to the floor, but I've been given strict instructions that.
I mean, basically, it's because there's like the break is like 1:40 till 1:45. So that will curtail the chance to come back for the next. So either you forget the break and sit and do this, and then we'll go straight to the, or what do you want to do?
Ian, I tell you what,
we need a break.
Let's hit, how many questions have we got? Okay, look. So I think it's 2 questions.
Okay. Yeah, do the question.
I like these guys, they're strict. Okay, there's 2 questions. Can I hear both questions and then, is that okay?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, sorry. Is there another hand? Sorry, there's 3. Okay, there's a mic. It's coming, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Mine's really quick. How do you think, from 1979, 1984, how has the landscape changed for the new Black or cultural artists, and not only being able to show their work, but also being able to articulate their work?
Okay, there's another question behind you there. I'm gonna gather them all because maybe there's.
It's just a question for Marlene. How did it feel making that work again, especially with this political climate?
Yeah, good question. There's a 3rd question over here.
You mentioned earlier about one of the objectives, creating radical Black art and its engagement with political. I wondered if, first of all, 40 years later, do you see radical Black art being made, or do you see it as important, as long as it's referencing political issues, does it need to be radical? Like, does it, as you were radical, 40 years later, is it still radical when people are doing the same thing? Right. Or what does it mean to be radical today?
That was about 5 questions. Okay, so there was a question about remaking the work, so we'll go there first, and we'll come to that radical question at the end.
Remaking the work is like seeing an old friend and just trying to hold on to that old friend and just I was bringing her into existence, and I was messaging my daughter's 25, she just turned 25 a couple of days ago, and I was messaging her to say, and I was referring to the work as she, and I'm saying, right, she's got arms now, she is standing strong, she's feeling in this way, and it was a very moving, it was really difficult to do. I had to make myself stay in the studio and make that work, but it's been worth it. Thank you.
Oh. So we had a question about the shifting cultural landscape. I'm going to sort of meld your two questions together, if that's okay.
She worded it way better.
Okay, so Keith, look at I haven't even said the word radical. Look at Keith.
No. It's
It's ready. Okay, so the question was about radical. I'm gonna formulate the question. I hope I do you justice. The question was about radical practice today and the shifting landscape. So, radical work that was made then, is it still radical now? I'm adding that. And do you see, I think that was the question, do you see radical work being made today?
I see every kind of work made, and I encourage everything, and it's fantastic. And in terms of that evolution over the last 4 or TT years, I think that is a panel. In fact, it's not a panel, it's a day.
Yes.
All on its own. And so I'm not even going to attempt to kind of go there. I think in the early 80s, because we were so discouraged from kind of talking about politics in practice, just the fact of attempting to kind of reference political things, could have been seen, was actually, I'm not comfortable with the term, but yes, a radical act. Now that multiplicity of political voices and multiplicities of ways of being have evolved so much over the last 4 or TT years, that there's a whole range of ways in which artists are using their practice to engage in a whole range of ways, a whole range of things. And I think we have to look very specifically at each practice to kind of then gauge how, if one to use that term radical, I'm not even sure what that term means.
I can tell you.
Well, it could mean something in terms of content, it could mean something in terms of approach, it could mean something in terms of materiality. It could be, there are all kinds of radical practices or practices which overturn or disrupt our expectations around things. So, yeah, it's a huge question, so I'm not even going to try.
Did you want to also answer? Yeah.
I agree with Keith, really. I think that if you ask me what radical practice was now, I'd find it very difficult to tell you what it is, other than it has something to do with being unexpected. It has something to do with being alternative to what is generally available. And I'm looking forward to seeing radical practice across the road when we go to the students' work. But when I'm talking to young people that are making art, I'm interested in encouraging them to do whatever it is that they feel. And I'm much more interested in their motivation for making the work. So it can be abstract work, it can be, it could take any form. But I'm not here to prescribe what a Black artist should be making. I think that we've had years of people trying to pigeonhole artists into particular types of ways of making work, and I'm not down with that at all.
Thank you. Janet?
Yeah, I think at that time it was a really hostile environment that we were in, the early 80s. So even with the exhibition, it was, even with the press, even like the local press. So I agree with what Marlene's saying, really, that you can't really pigeonhole us. And I think now that people should be able to express themselves quite freely and not feel that we define that this is the box that you should stay in, because obviously that's that's what we were experiencing at that time. That this is that you're invisible, and you've got to be confined and just keep yourself quietly still. So I think I got quite inspired by one of Sylvia's students yesterday, because I was telling Marlene that we're taken aback, weren't we? She's a photography student.
She's here somewhere.
Yeah, is she here? Yeah, because she's from London, and I said, why have you come to Wolverhampton? And she said she was inspired by the Black Arts movement because everything started here, and I thought that's the kind of legacy that we're talking about, and that really touched us, didn't it? Yeah.
Well, I have to thank you, Janet, Marlene. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful conversation.